Morning and welcome to our second day of the conference. If you experience any technical difficulties throughout the session, please go to the help desk in the top menu bar and use the chat live functionality to speak directly with our platform support. There will be a Q&A towards the end of the presentation, and we will ask you to get involved in some poll questions throughout. You can engage in both of these activities via the Slido box on the right-hand side of your screen, by scanning the QR code you currently see on the presentation slide, or by going to slido.com and entering this reference number C179. I'll now hand over to our speaker for the session, Helen Ashenden. Helen, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Can you confirm that I can be heard and seen?
Yes, you can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day. It's great to have you with us, and great also that you've logged in to hear me talk about our new framework for delegated claims administrators. Probably by now, everybody has picked up on this new-ish phrase, delegated claims administrators, which is what was more commonly known previously as TPAs. Basically, third parties who are handling claims for Lloyd's. So what are our learning objectives from the session today? So by the end of the session, you should be able to describe the DCA approval process that we've put in place, explain the Lloyd's onboarding of the grandfathered DCAs, and also identify the benefits of the new DCA framework, and also understand, most importantly for you, how it might align with the audit activities. So this slide introduces and explains the new framework for the approval of DCAs. But before I talk to you about this, I wanted to go back a little bit in history just to give background as to how we got to a point where we introduced the new rule last year. So I think it all began probably 10-ish years ago, when there was a recognition that Lloyd's framework around what were then TPAs was quite far apart from our framework around cover holders. So our framework around delegated underwriting was tighter than our framework around delegated claims handling, and it was recognition within Lloyd's that that gap should be narrowed. So in 2012, the intermediaries bylaw was amended, and that amendment required managing agents to notify Lloyd's if they wanted to appoint a TPA. So we have in fact, and this is important for what I come on to in a few slides' time, we have in fact been maintaining a register of TPAs for the past 8 years. Which is still ongoing, and we use our current systems for that purpose. So that's really the start point of the journey, I would say, is that the change to the intermediaries bylaw in 2012. And then 2 or 3 years ago, it was decided that we ought to narrow the gap by approving TPAs similarly to the way that we approve cover holders. And as with these things at Lloyd's, that required a significant amount of consultation with the market. So we went through the standard consultation, and the decision was made by the appropriate governance within Lloyd's to change the bylaw so that TPAs would need to be approved. As I say, that was 2 or 3 years ago. At about the same time, there was a discussion, which no doubt you would have heard about at the time, about replacing Atlas. And the concept behind replacing Atlas that was developed at that time was that instead of managing agents carrying out their own due diligence, using their own processes, what would happen is that the cover holders would submit their due diligence information into this new system that would replace Atlas. And the managing agents would assess that information in the new system, and then Lloyd's would have a look and see what assessments had been carried out and would approve the cover holders based on that, what would then be standardized due diligence information submitted by the cover holder into this new system. Then at that time was being called Chorus, now DCOM. So that really sets the scene then. So we wanted to bring the framework in line with cover holders. We decided we wanted to approve TPAs, and we decided that we would adopt this new approach, which was developed over 2019 for the purpose of developing a new Atlas replacement system. We would use that same approach where there would be standardized due diligence for TPAs, at the back end of which Lloyd's would then decide whether or not it would approve those TPAs. So throughout 2020, we've been developing the process for the first half of 2020 really, for approving TPAs, bearing in mind that we want to transition to the system once it's built, so that the process that we've developed can lend itself to being run via that system once the DCOM system is built. So as I go through my presentation this morning, if you bear in mind that it's this notion of having standardized due diligence using a market system that's behind the approach that we've adopted. Okay, so the rule itself then on approval, as I say, as you see on this slide, is that since 30 September last year, if a managing agent wishes to appoint a DCA that is not already approved by Lloyd's, it needs to submit to Lloyd's an application for approval. Now, one of the things that crops up quite a lot is the question around what exactly is a DCA. So the first thing is that it doesn't matter whether it's appointed under a binder or an open market or via consortia or line slips. It's any firm that's appointed by a managing agent that has authority to determine a claim. It expressly excludes cover holders. We already have a process, as you all know, for approving cover holders, so that's quite distinct. So if a cover holder wants to have claims handling authority, the approval process the cover holder goes through is the same as it always has been. It doesn't have to go through a separate process as introduced recently for DCAs. It also excludes managing agents. It also, at the moment at least, excludes law firms. They do not need to be approved by Lloyd's. So managing agents can appoint law firms without them going through the approval process, and law firms don't and certainly shouldn't appear on what is now our DCA register. And it also doesn't include firms that don't have authority to determine a claim, but are just advising the managing agent or a DCA or a cover holder on a claim, typically loss adjusters or indeed law firms who are advising, but as I said, they wouldn't be caught anyway. As I've explained in the background, the DCAs, before they're approved by Lloyd's, will be subject to standardized due diligence. Now, in 2019, as you probably were aware at the time, there were a number of workshops discussing how the Atlas replacement should look that came out with really the standardized due diligence. They came out with that the market and the managing agents decided what the information was that they would require a cover holder, including a cover holder handling claims and including a TPA, to provide prior to a managing agent making a decision as to whether or not to appoint them. So what we've done is we've used that set of information which those workshops came up with nearly a couple of years ago now, and we've turned that questionnaire, because we don't yet have a system, we've turned that into a survey style questionnaire, which we send to the DCAs, which they're required to answer as part of the approval process. Now, a register of all approved DCAs is available on Lloyds.com, and the detail around, including what the standardized due diligence looks like, is available also on Lloyds.com, and you can see the link there where you can find our guidance. Now, it has to be said, we don't have a vast volume of applications, but we do have 1 or 2 a year. That's been our experience over the past few years, and it has been our experience already since last September. We've had a handful of applications already. So, in summary, this is the actual process for the approving a DCA. So a managing agent decides that they want to appoint a DCA. We then send to the DCA a link to this survey style questionnaire, and the DCA provides the standard due diligence information by answering the survey questionnaire and by providing documents in support of those answers. It kind of varies a bit, but that's between 20 or 30 documents. The managing agent then reviews that information, both the answers to the questions and also the documents. And Lloyd's then reviews the information provided by the DCA as well as the managing agent's comments on that information. So the managing agent has to provide something pretty similar to the decision paper in the cover holder approval process. And then once Lloyd's has reviewed the DCA's information and also the managing agent's comments, Lloyd's will either confirm the approval or not. So that's it when it comes to the approval process. Now, as I've said, we have a register of what was TPAs, now DCAs, and they obviously, for the time being, make up the vast majority of the TPAs or DCAs that have been appointed or are currently handling Lloyd's claims. So what we did when we introduced the new rule on the 30th of September, we also said that all of the DCAs that had previously been appointed by Lloyd's managing agents that have claims handling authority from those managing agents and that have been notified to us and are on our register would be grandfathered into our new framework. And so we now have approximately, I've said 900 entities there, but that's at office level. So we maintain the information about the TPAs at address level, and counting them at address level, it is approximately 900 entities. If you count them at global level, so if you make Crawford 1 and Sedgwick 1, it's probably, just less than 400 entities. So it really depends on how you count them in terms of what the number is, but I would say 400 is probably the closest number in terms of named firms on our register. And we're continuing to talk to managing agents and the DCAs to make sure they are still being used, that we've got their names right, and that we've got their office details right. And we have now contacted pretty much all of the DCAs to let them know that this new framework has been introduced, and just to check again that we've got the most current legal name and address. And then the last point on this slide, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, is the process that we're calling the onboarding of grandfathered DCAs. So before I talk in a bit more detail about the onboarding of grandfathered DCAs, which actually I think is probably the thing that's of most interest to the audit community, I'll just touch on what we believe to be the benefits of this new framework, so that we can sort of kind of remind ourselves what is the point of what we've done. So as I've sort of mentioned, that because we're adopting this standardized due diligence process, and we will be making available to managing agents the due diligence information that we've collected for DCAs that have been approved. We're going to make that available to managing agents that use those DCAs rather than to the public at large. What that means is that managing agents can easily access the due diligence information that has been obtained through our process for DCAs. The second benefit there is that it means that since Lloyd's will have asked for the standardized due diligence information, it will prevent DCAs having to answer several duplicative requests for that due diligence information from managing agents, which we understand to be fairly onerous for DCAs. I mean, I've heard it said that basically managing agents are all asking for the same thing, but in a slightly different way. So by standardizing the due diligence process, we'll eliminate that sort of onerous task for DCAs to answer lots of different questions asking for the same thing. So it should then also reduce the ongoing burden for both managing agents and DCAs in checking that that information is correct, because I'll touch on it in a minute, because in addition to collecting the due diligence information and making it available to managing agents, we'll also be making sure that it's up to date in the same way that there is the ongoing compliance oversight for cover holders. We'll be doing a similar exercise in relation to DCAs. So as well as making the information more easily available for managing agents and reducing the burden on DCAs, we hope that we will also improve the quality of the actual due diligence process that takes place prior to the appointment of DCAs. And that in turn will reduce the risk of DCAs that don't have the resources or the capability that are adequate to provide expert and efficient claim service being appointed in the first place. And ultimately, the goal of this then is to ensure that there are better policyholder outcomes where claims are being dealt with more efficiently and more effectively. So, onboarding and ongoing compliance oversight. So we have, as I've mentioned, grandfathered DCAs. So the DCAs that were already on the register as at September last year, we've told them they are effectively already approved. But we've also explained to them that we will, over a period of time, be collecting the standardized due diligence information from these entities and making that available to managing agents that appoint them. And this will be the bulk of our work over the next 2 or 3 years in relation to this new framework, as you can imagine. I mean, we don't have thousands of DCAs as there are with cover holders, but 400 is not a number to be sneezed at either. And as I've mentioned, that this exercise of collecting standardized due diligence information for the grandfathered DCAs is being described as the onboarding of grandfathered DCAs. We've started this process. We really just tentatively started for 2021, but it's already taking up quite a lot of our time. And as we're going through the process, it's enabling us to test the question set. And over the course of this year, we'll ensure that if we can improve on the question set, either taking some questions out that aren't really adding value or adding more, that's what we'll do over the course of the year. And I was interested, for example, yesterday, during a session yesterday afternoon, for those that were watching it, where there was a discussion around whether or not DCAs can support remote audits. And I think it was a lady from Brit, Lucinda Wright from Brit, was saying that it would be good if the right question is asked during the due diligence process to be sure as to whether or not actually remote audits would be possible. And I was quite interested when I heard that, and I thought, oh, well, I wonder if we have got the right question and that we will be able to find out properly during the due diligence information collection exercise whether or not the DCA can support remote audits. So that's just an example of what we'll be doing this year is to looking at the questions and really strengthening them, so that when the DCOM system is built and made available, we have confidence that the questions are as good as they can be. So back to the slide and back to what the actual process is. So we'll liaise with the grandfather DCAs to capture the information. The burden isn't falling on the managing agents here. And as I say, we've started that process. We asked the DCAs to fill out the questionnaire. There has been talk around how lengthy the questionnaire is. There are quite a lot of questions, but our experience so far is that the DCAs, certainly some DCAs, have answered the questions really quite quickly. We had a DCA that answered the questions as part of an approval process before Christmas in just a couple of days. Once we've seen the answer to the questions and we've reviewed the documents, we'll make sure that it's complete. So if any of the questions aren't fully answered or the documents don't contain the detail that we expect it to, and that really comes out of the question set that the workshops came out with 2019. So we're really just making sure the information's complete. We then will make that available to managing agents that have a commercial relationship with the DCA or who are considering using that DCA. In which case we'll say to the DCA, there's a managing agent that wants to use your services. Can we please provide your information to them? And then, as with the approval process, we'll ask all the grandfather DCAs, once the onboarding has been complete, to sign a Lloyd's undertaking, similar to the undertaking that's signed by cover holders. And then, as I've mentioned already, over the course of the next year, we'll be developing ongoing compliance oversight checks for DCAs. So the standardized due diligence information, I put this slide up, but you would probably be able to list this out for yourselves without my running through it, but I thought I would, just in case you're wondering, what does the due diligence information cover? As you'd expect, it covers financial questions we ask for the accounts, experience and reputation, E&O policies, what human resources are available at the class of business level. We ask about bank accounts and how claims paid, what are the system capability, and then we ask, I think there's questions around 10 different compliance documents at the end, and we set out what those compliance documents should contain. And so we're checking that each one of those compliance documents does actually contain those elements. And of course, there's lots of questions around about their claims processes and how they achieve proactive claims handling, how they manage third parties, how they communicate with policyholders, what surge plans do they have in place, their complaints handling and reporting. So nothing surprising there, I don't think. But as I say, if you're interested to see more, do go and have a look on lloyds.com, and in the appendix 2 to our guidelines, which you'll find on that link that was on the first slide, you'll see the questions in full. So just a break from my voice. Here's a poll question, and you can access Slido on the right-hand side of your slide. So this is a multiple choice question, and of course, what is, I'm sure, of most interest to you all is what does this mean for you as auditors? So we haven't gathered the due diligence information, the standardized due diligence information for DCAs. The question to you is, what do you think would be the most valuable use of the due diligence information during the audits? And you've got four choices here. One is useful background information on the entity, including key personnel. Another is opportunity to test whether the systems and processes are operating as documented. The third is identification within the due diligence information of areas of weakness that could then be the subject of an audit focus. And then your fourth option is that you can't choose between those three, because actually all of those would be valuable to be used during the audit. So can I ask you please to vote now?
Thanks, Helen. So we've got some answers coming in. I'll give it a few seconds and then I'll let you know what it's looking like. Okay, it's a very clear winner. The answer is for all of the above is the most popular answer there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm not altogether surprised to hear that. It's certainly our intention to work towards a goal of being able to make use of the due diligence information during audit. The due diligence exercise is by no means the start and finish of a process. It's very much part of an overall oversight framework. So that the exciting part really is, I think, the next steps once we've collected this standardized due diligence information. So what do we see as the next steps? And you'll see number one is that we do align audits with the new framework, because we strongly believe that the standardized due diligence information will be very valuable to auditors. It will be made available to auditors, and I'm already in discussion with Kate and LMA DA groups around how we can deliver that. So obviously what we would expect is that if we can see there are gaps or weaknesses in the due diligence information, those can be further investigated during the audit. And also, I think something which occurs to me more and more as I'm looking at the due diligence information that we're seeing is that that information sets out. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I think I did that by mistake. Excuse me, I'll go back. We have documented processes and controls, but there's another question as to whether or not they're actually operating, which can be achieved by audits. And so we'll be looking for ways of ensuring that the audits can obtain evidence of the systems actually operating. So we'll also be working towards what sort of checks should be carried out on an ongoing basis, and whether those checks should include audit outputs. And the next set of questions is on that subject. We'll also, as I've touched on, continue to review and refine the standard due diligence information, including minimum expectations, so what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we'll always welcome input from auditors and what they're seeing during audits to refine our view as to what should we be looking for in this due diligence information standardization exercise. So we'll be actually then developing the checks for the OCOs for DCAs, which aren't in place yet, but they will be shortly. Over the course of this year, they'll be developed. And then a sort of slightly new topic, but you might wonder if this is coming. We'll be considering the application of the enhanced claims due diligence framework to cover holders with claims authority, because at the moment the questionnaire is very much about an entity's claims framework, but it is only for TPAs, it's not for cover holders. So we'll be looking to actually apply a similar sort of due diligence framework to cover holders, and that's very much something which we're just beginning to think about now and we'll be developing over the course of the year. And then last but not least, in due course, the intention is that the process that we've developed will be transitioned to DCOM. So the information that we're collecting on DCAs will ultimately sit within that system. And over the course of the next few months, we'll be thinking, as that system is being built, we'll be talking to the technical team and the architects about how we can transition from where we are today to that system. So final slide, final question. Apart from, I've got one more slide simply reminding you of the learning objectives, but this final poll, do you think that the outcome of the audit could be and should be considered as part of the ongoing compliance oversight framework? So then do you think it should be a sort of a cycle, really, starting with the due diligence and then audits and then output of audits, taking into account when the ongoing compliance checks are carried out? And so you've got three options there. Yes, you think that it's appropriate for the outcome of audits to be fed into the OCO process, or you don't think it is, that the OCO should be distinct, or that you're not really quite sure how that would work. So please, can you vote now?
Thanks, Helen. They're coming in nice and quickly on this one. A few more seconds. Great. So yeah, very strong answer on this one as well. But 92% of the attendees would say yes to this question.
Well, I hope that doesn't mean that it was too obvious a question, but it does mean that we're all thinking along the same lines, which is that the framework that we're developing for the approval and for the onboarding is very much only a part of the story, and that it really needs to be developed in tandem with both the audit scope and the audit outcomes, and that the OCO should also be part of that framework. So I think this year will be very much about bringing together the different parts of the framework and making sure that they all work effectively together to make the oversight of these DCAs as effective as possible. So next is my slide reminding of the learning objectives, and then I'll pass over for the Q&A session. So the learning objectives were describing the approval process, which I hope is clear to you now, explaining the onboarding of grandfathered DCAs, which is really all about collecting standardized due diligence information, and then identifying the benefits of the framework and how, and I'm beginning to understand how it might align with the audit activities. So that then brings us on to the Q&A session. So I'll answer whatever questions I can and hand over to Sam.
Thanks, Helen. So we've got a lot coming in at the moment. So just a reminder, everyone, that you can ask questions just on the right-hand side of the screen, or by going to slido.com and entering C179. So the most popular rated question that we've got so far is, how many DCAs have been refused appointment and why?
Well, we've only had about 4 applications, so we haven't actually refused any yet. I think it's a question that we do get asked quite a lot, as what are going to be the hard stops. I think a lot of the things that we would expect to see a DCA could probably work on to produce. So, for example, if there isn't a surge plan, if there's no test, if there's no evidence of a surge plan being tested, those things we think we will ask for. But we think it's unlikely we'll refuse an application, because we think probably a DCA would be able to work on producing those. I think the obvious hard stops are they don't have a license where a license required. They don't have an E&O policy in place, or fidelity of crime policy in place, or we are going to require that the DCA can produce a cover holder reporting standards compliant bordereau. So those are the things which at the moment look like they will be the hard stops. We haven't had any applications in yet that have failed those hard stops, but we will also expect DCAs to be cooperative with us when we ask for, as I say, documented surge plans or succession plans, and for their, if you like, compliance documents, complaints policies to be compliant.
Great, thanks, Helen. The next one is a 2-part question, so I'll ask the first part first. Does each separate office of a DCA need to be approved separately?
Well, I have to be a bit careful with the language here, and we're really mirroring what the position is on the cover holders. I mean, as far as possible, we don't want to create something which is different from cover holders. So we are aligning with cover holders on this. So from a sort of bylaw perspective, the approval is at company level, it's at entity level. But we are registering on our register each DCA at office level, and if a managing agent wants to appoint a DCA, they need to be clear about which office they're appointing, and we are collecting due diligence information at office level, and that is I'm not very familiar with cover holders and how many offices cover holders have, but I suspect there are a dozen or 2 dozen DCAs that, well, I know there are a dozen or 2 dozen DCAs that have many offices globally, and capturing that due diligence information at office level is definitely going to be a challenge, but a challenge that we're actually working our way through this quarter, because we're starting with the larger DCAs. So approving at company level, but carrying out due diligence at office level.
Great, thank you. The second part of the question, how do complaints against DCAs compare with non-DCA complaints?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. But it's a very interesting question, and we'll come back to you with it. Or I think probably the best thing is if you could send that in to events@lloyds.com. Sam, is that the right answer? Or
yes, that would be great. Yeah, if you could just send that into events@lloyds.com, and then we will get back to you separately. Thank you.
And any comments? I don't know if we can see comments come through, but if anybody can send comments through on what they think the answer to that would be, it'd be interesting to hear from auditors.
Yeah, please.
Whether
send them through.
Yeah, we're gonna have a guess. People can guess, and we'll let you know if you're right as to where the complaints come from, if we can.
Perfect. Okay, so next question. If a managing agent outsources claims administration or adjusting of lower value claims, does the outsourced company need to be a registered DCA?
Yes, I mean, I think the key question here, and we use this phrase determine. I mean, I think it's all about whether or not the DCA can make the claims handling decision for the managing agent. So it doesn't matter what the value is, it's simply can they agree to pay, and it's not actually even just pay. So we're including the definition emergency response companies. We're also including a company that would go in and provide cyber services post some kind of attack, because they're effectively providing the claim service. So we're distinguishing between making the decision on the claim and providing the claim service, as in paying the claim, or providing the providing the rescue service, as opposed to, as I said in my slide, advising. So adjusters that will simply assess the loss and report back to underwriters what the assessment of the loss is aren't captured, but any third party who actually makes a decision that the claim should be paid, or makes a decision that the traveller should have the assistance provided to them, the decision makers in terms of providing the service, are captured, as I say, regardless of value, because it's about the customer experience, really. And so it doesn't matter if it's low value for the customer; it's still important, and it's managing that risk of poor customer outcomes that the framework's designed to manage and protect.
Great, thank you. Next question: will auditors have access to the DCA due diligence material?
That's absolutely the intention. Yeah, I mean, I would suspect that when we build the DCOM system, it will be more. It may be packaged up more neatly. We've done our best. At the moment, it's answers to a long list of questions plus a pack of actual documents. But absolutely, the plan is that will be made available to auditors.
Great. How receptive were DCAs to the new framework?
It's difficult to say, because so far we haven't had much of an ongoing discussion with a large proportion of the 400. We have started onboarding about 10. It sort of depends. As I've said, we've started with a very large global DCA that itself does have hundreds of offices globally, and it certainly has at least 20 companies that will be onboarding. That particular DCA, we invited them to be the first to be onboarded, and we explained to them that the benefit of this would be that they would only then need to answer questions hopefully just once, rather than each time a new managing agent wanted to use them, that we would collect the information centrally. So they seemed pleased, because they confirmed what we understood to be the case, which is that it is onerous for them to be pretty constantly responding to similar requests from managing agents. So I would say they were positive, but as I've said, and you've probably heard, many of you, that it is a long question set, and I think there is a bit of a nervousness for DCAs that they are going to need to go through a long process before they can be appointed by a new managing agent. So I think it's possibly a little bit more work before they can actually get appointed by a managing agent than it might otherwise have been. But in the long run, I think it's recognised that they'll reap benefits from it in the long run.
Great, thank you. So we've got time for a couple more questions. Note that you anticipate 15 to 20 applications. Do you anticipate many losing their status or withdrawing?
It's very hard to say. I mean, I mentioned in answer to the first question around have we refused any yet, that there definitely will be some hard stops. And those will be applied not only to approvals, but they'll also be applied to onboarding. So yes, if we onboard a DCA and we find they don't have an E&O policy, we will have to give them a period of time within which to get it. And if they don't, we will need to talk to managing agents about how we can remove that DCA from their business. And what we do recognise is that actually with removing authority from a DCA that's already handling claims is a fairly complicated process. So we absolutely wouldn't take the decision lightly, and we would most definitely work very closely with managing agents before taking that step. But yes, it definitely in theory is possible that we would need to remove approval status from a DCA that is grandfathered.
Great, thank you. What are the key criteria for a DCA approval?
Well, as I said, it's a long list, and it's hard to say what the key criteria are, because it is a combination of things. I mean, I've mentioned already, policy. I've mentioned they need to have a license. They need to be able to report. Quite a lot of the questions are for managing agents to answer around: is there experience in the DCA for the relevant class of business? So we will be checking that managing agents have thought about what experience is needed, and that does the DCA have it, and that does need to be important, as well as the DCA's ability to ensure that they can proactively handle claims. One managing agent said to me when we were talking about the due diligence information that he was very surprised and wouldn't appoint a DCA that wasn't able to didn't have a handle on workload. How many claims did each of its claims handlers have? So I think we'll be developing over the course of this year, working together with managing agents. I mean, we don't want to be we want to be developing a standard Lloyd's approach, so that managing agents and Lloyd's together agree that the market shouldn't be appointing DCAs, for example, that can't manage their workload. So that's an area that we definitely will be looking at. But as I said in one of my slides, this year we'll make sure that we've got the threshold, if you like, of acceptability in a place which the market's comfortable with. But we will be developing that in those kind of areas. And also another area which I haven't really touched on, which will be in there in terms of needing to be assessed, is data security. There are quite a lot of questions around systems and controls around data, so those will need to be adequate as well.
Great, thank you. So we've still got a few more minutes. I'll see what the most popular question is. Will the information that was previously in Charles Taylor database be transferred over to the new onboarding for grandfathered DCAs and in turn DCOM?
Yes, I mean our first DCA that it's still in the course of onboarding, because as I said, they've got many companies and hundreds of offices globally. Where some of their companies have registered with the Charles Taylor register, and we have taken the information. We've looked at that information, answered some of the questions on the questionnaire from that information, and then asked the DCA to finish the exercise. But actually, I would say it's not much more than half, I would say, of the information that we're asking for is in the Charles Taylor information. I mean, it does cover broadly the same areas, but yeah, so the answer is we will use it where we can. And it's broadly the same area, but there's a little bit more detail in some areas that's required on our standardized due diligence exercise.
Thanks. Okay, we've got time for one last question. There are quite a few questions being asked, so any that we don't ask, please do send them to events@lloyds.com and we will follow up with you afterwards. We've had quite a lot come in, Helen, so you might be busy. Last question, are emergency assistance providers considered to be DCA?
Yes, they are. I mean, I think this actually cropped up when I was at Lloyd, when I was helping develop the framework for Lloyd's Brussels. Interestingly, a little aside really, the Belgian regulator was particularly interested for assistance providers. And I think that's right, because in terms of vulnerable customers or policyholder experience, it's in that emergency situation that the service that's provided by your insurers is particularly important and particularly key for sort of obvious reasons. So even without my having said that, because the managing agent has outsourced that determination of that claim to that party, it is that entity that will decide whether or not the emergency service needs to be provided, and then will provide the emergency service. That does then fall within the DCA definition. But as I say, in my mind, they should be particularly. It's a particularly important entity for Lloyd's to have some kind of framework around. And yes, we've had. We are onboarding a couple as we speak, so we will be putting them through the standardized due diligence questionnaire. Not all the questions will be relevant, but a lot of them will be relevant, and I'm glad we're onboarding them, because it's an early opportunity to check that the standardized due diligence exercise is appropriate for them, and we can adjust it to make sure that we've asked the right questions and that we've recognized the ones that aren't relevant.
Great, thank you. So we're now at the end. Is there anything that you would like to add, Helen? Just
only thank you very much to everybody who's attended for your interest and for your attendance, and also really to encourage you all to send any questions you've got to events at Lloyd, or any comments, any input you can provide on how you think we can align the processes that I've described with the audits. This year is very much going to be about refining and improving the process for collecting the due diligence information from the grandfather DCAs, and for refining the questionnaire as part of the approval process. And that information is very much, as I say, the start then of the framework of oversight for those DCAs, of which the audit then becomes a very large part of that. So as auditors, your input on what should the due diligence information look like, how can you use that to strengthen your audits is going to be really key over the next few months. So please keep providing your comments, and really we look forward to working with you as a community to as we continue to build out this DCA framework. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Helen. So yeah, we've now come to the end of the session. So thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you at the live Q&A with our Lloyd's Brussels representatives at 10:45. You can join this session via the Networking Lounge tab in the top menu bar. Thanks, everyone.